The 10 Best War Movies of the 1990s, ranked. There is seldom a more moving genre than the war film. The scale, the loss, the fight for freedom. What makes the genre so compelling is more often than not, the war film is telling a story associated with a real historical event and occasionally about the real people who fought. Cinema is rich with tales of war, and the 90s gave us arguably some of the most interesting war films of all time. The 1990s were an interesting time. The Cold War was over, and the War on Terror would not be for another decade. For Americans, there was no global conflict that defined the decade like previous ones. Action films tended to move away from foreign threats and were more fascinated with large-scale disasters like Twister, Independence Day, or Armageddon. This meant that films that did tackle wars tended to be ones looking back, with a few tackling the topic of the Gulf War. What does a decade without a major global conflict have to say about war on film? Here are the best war films of the 1990s. 10. Crimson Tide, 1995. Directed by Tony Scott, the film Crimson Tide has some remarkable performances by Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington. The plot follows Captain Frank Ramsey, Gene Hackman, and Lieutenant Commander Ron Hunter, Denzel Washington, are both senior officers of a U.S. submarine called the USS Alabama. When a breakaway Russian state poses the potential threat of nuclear war, Ramsey and Hunter lock horns in a power struggle for the vessel because of their varying ideologies and intended course of action against the rogue Soviet state. The film also has some hard-hitting and brilliantly written dialogue by an uncredited young Quentin Tarantino, which makes the film even more appreciable. 9. Courage Under Fire, 1996. Another film starring Denzel Washington in a leading role, Courage Under Fire, directed by Edward Zwick, explores the story of Lieutenant Colonel Sorrelling, Washington, who has a black mark on his record for accidentally destroying a friendly tank in the heat of a nighttime battle. Sorrelling is then transferred to a desk job as the U.S. Army covers up the details of the incident. He is then asked to investigate the story of Captain Karen Emma Walden, Meg Ryan, who is to be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, becoming the first woman to receive the distinction. Sorrelling unravels the truth behind Walden's story and her heroics in battle, along with some plot twists, which makes the film's storyline even more compelling. 8. The Hunt for Red October, 1990. A submarine war thriller, The Hunt for Red October is a classic 90s film based on the Cold War. Set in 1984, the film depicts the story of an undetectable Soviet sub called Red October commanded by Captain Marco Ramius, Sean Connery, who moves the vessel toward U.S. waters while the U.S. military and CIA are left guessing whether Ramius is trying to defect or instigate a war. The film is based on Tom Clancy's novel of the same name and has some stellar performances by Alec Baldwin as CIA agent Jack Ryan and, of course, the immaculate Connery. The suspense and drama, along with the action, make the film a gripping war movie that doesn't disappoint. 7. The Tuskegee Airmen, 1995. Based on an account of the Tuskegee Airmen, the first unit comprising only African American pilots deployed into battle during World War II, the film The Tuskegee Airmen depicts the journey of the unit as they contrive to become a dependable and formidable force to be reckoned with for the Allies as they take to the skies against the Nazi Luftwaffe. The film portrays the story of Hannibal Lee, Lawrence Fishburne, and his fellow unit members Walter Peoples III, Alan Payne, Leroy Cappy, Malcolm Jamal Warner, Lieutenant Billy A. Train Roberts, Cuba Gooding Jr., and others in their journey from their African American roots to fighting for the Allies during World War II. The film touches on the difficulties they faced because of being men of color in the U.S. Air Force during the time. 6. When Trumpets Fade, 1998. When Trumpets Fade is an intriguing take on the psychological effects of war and how soldiers cope with the trials and tribulations that fighting in the heat of battle entails. Set against the backdrop of World War II, the film follows the story of Private Sergeant David Manning, Ron Eldard, the sole survivor of his platoon after a brutal battle against the Germans. Manning is then promoted to sergeant and is asked to lead a new team into battle by his superiors but is reluctant to resume his duties because of the trauma he's faced. However, he ends up back on the battlefront, and the story follows him and his new unit's exploits in what was one of the bloodiest battles fought between the Americans and Germans during World War II. It's a categorically eye-opening film delving into the atrocities of war and the inner workings of the minds of soldiers who are faced with the dilemma of whether to follow orders and perform their duties or safeguard their lives. 5. The Thin Red Line, 1998. The Thin Red Line retells the fictionalized version of the Battle of Mount Austin, which took place in the Pacific theater of World War II. Thin Red Line is one of the most beautifully shot war films ever made, and its scope can make up for any flaws the movie may have. It is nevertheless a brilliant philosophical look into war from a brilliant director, Terrence Malick, who returned to Hollywood to direct the film after a two-decade absence. 4. The Last of the Mohicans, 1992. Most war films tend to focus on World War I and II, as well as the Vietnam War. Not much is told in cinema regarding the French and Indian War of the mid-1700s. One film that deals with this conflict is the 1992 Michael Mann classic, The Last of the Mohicans. A film that is not just one of Michael Mann's best movies, but one of the best performances of celebrated actor Daniel Day-Lewis. Using the conflict as more of a background piece for this fictional drama, audiences were delighted by an epic romantic action-adventure film. 3. Gettysburg, 1993. Gettysburg tells an epic tale starring an endless cast of A-list actors, about one of the most deadly battles to take place on United States soil during the Civil War. Critics have hailed it as a reverent retelling of the battle. The film is also credited for featuring top-notch performances from those involved, in particular Jeff Daniels, whose performance was snubbed for Oscar consideration at the 66th Academy Awards. 2. Braveheart, 1995. Braveheart is widely considered to be one of the most iconic films of all time. Directed, produced, and starred in by Mel Gibson, the movie tells the story of Sir William Wallace, a Scottish warrior who led his people in the First War of Scottish Independence in 1296. From the cinematography to the soundtrack to Gibson's best acting to date, Braveheart is an epic of a film as there is. The culmination of the movie's success came at the 68th Academy Awards, where the film won both Best Picture and Best Director. 1. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. If there is one war movie from the 90s that can top the epic scope of Braveheart, look no further than Steven Spielberg's masterpiece, Saving Private Ryan. Boasting a truly all-star cast of actors, the movie tells the tale of a group of U.S. soldiers who venture behind enemy lines to save the life of Private First Class James Francis Ryan, played by Matt Damon in one of his best roles. The movie tests the will and resolve of its main characters as they put their lives on the line to rescue a fellow soldier they have never met. The one blemish on the movie's record, and not one of its own fault, is its unfortunate loss to Shakespeare in Love at the 71st Academy Awards. Saving Private Ryan continues to be one of the most harrowing and accurate portrayals of war ever put on film.